Good day, my name is Lieutenant Colonel retired Cavalcante. I'm a doctrine advisor here in the Brazilian Pck Center. And today we'll talk about this first lesson connected to UN Charter and Pck Operations. And we will focus on the evolution of Pck Operations. And we'll try to connect, to insert the Brazilian participation in this evolution as well. Our objectives today: identify the main chapters of the Charter of UN related to Pck Operations, explain the differences between Chapter 6, 7, and 8, the Charter, considering the establishment of Pck Preparation. So there are many doubts about the chapters, and you try to explain, to identify the main characteristics of all those. Here, this is a picture of the evolution of Pck Preparation. So it's very important to memorize, to understand this context, to see the timeline in terms of evolution and what we are facing right now. The first model here, you see the traditional Pck Operations, starting in 1948, about 1948 to 1989. It is basically a conflict where when two states were having a conflict and the United Nations had to act to minimize or to finish this conflict that were threatened the international community. In this phase, the first phase of Pck Operations, basically we had the military component, okay, and there was a conflict. Example, United Nations had to play a role to settle negotiations to establish a truce or a treaty, and would deploy in the field military observers or contingents. So basically the role of the United Nations was to check if the international treaty already signed was followed by the opponents in this conflict. So during this phase, we would say that the Pck Operations was connected to Chapter 6, but the UN Charter. But if we read the entire UN Charter, we will not be able to find the expression Pck Operations. So indeed, in fact, when we refer Chapter 6 or Chapter 7 or Chapter 8 from UN Charter, there isn't this expression in the UN Charter. It was a tool that the UN had to develop to connect the Pck Operations in a law environment. Okay, I will explain a little bit better ahead. So during this phase, the mandate was connected. The first phase, the mandate was connected to Chapter 6. It means that the military personnel in that phase, only military personnel, could use lethal force only in self-defense. Okay? Only in self-defense. Basically, to observe and report. These basic tasks were the main ones: observe and report. Two states, buffer zone, the middle, UN, military observers or contingents. Okay? So this kind of operation lasted 2 at the end of 1980s, beginning 1990s, and start a transition during this phase. And during this phase transition, something happened in terms of international conflicts. They became more and more civil wars. Completely different scenario from the other one, the traditional one. Okay? So now, during this phase, the transition phase, we can see many actors involved, many threats, not only two states. So it is very important to understand this scenario, to understand the failures of United Nations during this period. What kind of failures? Genocides happened. Examples: Somalia, Rwanda, Bosnia. So, even though UN deployed in the field, these genocides happened. And these genocides caused a huge impact on the public opinion. And the United Nations was questioning about its role. Why could not avoid, United Nations could not avoid that event, those events. So something had to happen, something had to. Coming back to this transition phase, I would like to emphasize that during this phase, we already have some kind of change. For example, this agenda for peace during the administration, the Boutros Ghali, it was important to emphasize that not only the military component is in the field. Here, during the transition phase, we can see already the military component, police and civilians. They are already in the field, but not integrated yet. It is very important. So, during this phase, at the end, the genocide, something very special happened. Brahim report. What is that? So, the Secretary General called the Ambassador Brahim, Algerian, Chancellor in the United Nations, to lead a team to write to new rules, new doctrines to be followed by UN Pck Preparations to avoid genocide. They all say that Brahim report is a turning point in terms of evolution of Pck Operations. Okay? As a consequence of Brahim report, we went to another evolution, another phase, multidimensional, with these three elements, different elements in the field: military, police, and civilians, but integrated, okay? With a doctrine called Capstone Doctrine. So, first of all, we had Brahim report, a study about the evolution, about what had to change, and after that, 8 years later, Capstone Doctrine, emphasizing what? Robust peacekeeping, giving more power, flexibility to the military component, using lethal force, not only self-defense, but beyond that, to protect civilians, to fulfill the mandate, and now under Chapter 7. So, there was a change, a shift within chapters, UN chapters, UN chapters from 6 to 7. Okay? 6 only observe and report. Chapter 7, using lethal force not only to self-defense, but to protect civilians beyond self-defense, to protect civilians and to fulfill the mandate. Okay? And missions, according to this new evolution, missions became robust. Military component became stronger with means to accomplish the mission, with more flexibility to use lethal force. Missions became more integrated, focusing on protection of civilians. Later on, we had the HIPPO report 2015. We had Congo as well, another step ahead in terms of evolution. And we had the Cruz report 2017. And we will try to explain as well. Here, the Brahim report 2000, reassessment of UN doctrine for peace operations. Chapter 6, 7 or 6.5, explaining these doubts. It's very important to know the difference between Chapter 7, peacekeeping operations, and Chapter 7, peace enforcement. Why is that important? Because if you read UN Charter, you see Chapter 7, peace enforcement. But we are talking about Chapter 7, peacekeeping operations. What is the difference between Chapter 7, peace enforcement, and Chapter 7, peacekeeping? And what is Chapter 6.5? Okay? Let's explain. Here, so in a peacekeeping operations, we can have three options in terms of chapters connecting UN Charter and the mandate. Okay? Chapter 6, only observe and report. Chapter 7, peacekeeping, meaning you can use lethal force beyond self-defense to fulfill the mandate and to protect civilians. Chapter 6, lethal force only in self-defense. Chapter 8, what's the meaning? When UN delegates the missions to a regional organization, for example, NATO. And what is the key role of consent? It means that in terms of doctrine, UN doctrine, Capstone doctrine, the main parts involved in the conflict must give consent to UN use lethal force beyond self-defense. Main parts means what? Not everyone will agree. And it is because threats change, scenario change. And to avoid genocide, it was necessary to change the concept of the doctrine as well. Main part means, the first one, the official government recognized by the international community must consent use of deployment of UN troops, use of lethal force beyond self-defense. So, consent from the host government is necessary. And Chapter 7, peace enforcement. What's the difference? Chapter 7 means peace enforcement when consent of the local government is not necessary. Okay? It's imposed. Peace will be imposed when that kind of conflict is threatening the international community. Examples: Libya. Libya is the last example when the Chapter 7 peace enforcement was used by UN. Other case here, Cyprus, Darfur, Mali, Haiti, MONUSCO, Central African Republic, all are examples of Chapter 7 peacekeeping operations. Most peacekeeping operations are under Chapter 7 nowadays. And 6.5, when there wasn't at the beginning an expression to analyze this kind of operation. Chapter 7 peacekeeping, we call now robust peacekeeping operations. When there wasn't this expression at the beginning, people used chapter 6.5. There isn't chapter 6.5. There is 6 or 7. 7 peacekeeping or 7 peace enforcement. Now, so conclusions. Conflict changed its threats, and peacekeeping operations had to change its doctrine to accomplish the missions. More integration between military, police and civilians. More flexibility to use force beyond self-defense to fulfill the mandate. And MINUSCO mandate, creating intervention brigade, was the most important change in terms of giving power for the military component. It opened a huge international debate about legality and sovereignty. Thank you.